Hi, I'm Amanda McKay. I'm a professional artist and I've been making these videos to give people tips to help become their most creative selves, and these tips are meant to help everybody regardless of your level of expertise. Right now, I want to talk about what I consider to be a myth about creativity, and that is that you have to have absolute freedom when it comes to what you're going to create. And I believe that at least in certain instances, setting some limits about what you can use basically for a creative project might help you get much more creative and interesting results. Now, as far as you as a person, I want you to think of yourself and your creative potential as limitless. But I'm talking about for certain specific projects. It can actually be a lot easier if you just put some restrictions on what you can and can't do. I've spoken in previous videos about the time years ago that I took an acting class, and it turned out to be very different from what I expected. I thought, yeah, we'll get a scene or a monologue, memorize it outside of class, and rehearse it outside of class, and then come in and perform it. Instead, the teacher would pair us up into scene partners, and we would have to write a scene and then rehearse it with our scene partner and perform it all within the one class, which if I recall, was about 3 hours long. So, I mean, we did have time. But he would give us some restrictions on what the scene had to be about. So I think for the very first class, it was something like, okay, this scene is going to be a conflict between family members. And then he would have like some kind of a line that we had to throw in, like, there's a full moon tonight, something like that. So every class he would give us these kind of restrictions, and we would have to write the scene. We'd have to write everything within probably an hour, and then rehearse it, and then perform it. So I remember after the class had been going on for a couple months, he just gave us free rein one time and said, okay, whatever, you can just make the scene about whatever you want it to be about. You don't have to put in these, this line or anything, just whatever you want to do. That was actually a lot harder. And I think the people who did best at that were people who kind of already had something in mind that, like, oh, I wish I could do a scene about this. So they kind of had a starting point. So this is what I'm talking about, that sometimes it can be easier if you're giving yourself some kind of limits. And this can especially be important if you have an ongoing project that you're working on. And this definitely has helped me. I'm predominantly an oil painter, and I paint still lifes of assembled natural objects, and they're allegorical, they have some kind of humanitarian or sometimes political message. When I first was working towards this, I hadn't quite started, but I knew I wanted to do still lifes. I remember the very first painting I did as kind of a practice, I had a little toy hippo, like a little realistic statue of a hippo that was basically a toy. And I remember I was imagining all these elaborate still life setups, and I even bought like some little model horses that I was going to use in my still lifes. And then when I really started painting for real, I decided, no, it's just going to be organic objects. And that could include like a strawberry or a flower that I bought at the store or at a florist. And then I would usually combine it with something that I had found in the woods or in the swamp, like a bone or a feather or something. And then several years into that, I decided, no, I'm just going to use natural objects, nothing that I could buy at a store, just what I could find foraging in the woods, the swamp, the beach. And so this was a lot. So initially it was more restrictive than when I could use toys, and it had to be no, organic objects. And then it became even more restrictive where I said, no, it can't be something I would buy at the store. It's got to be something that I would find in the woods or, wherever. And this, I think, has actually really pushed me to come up with some good ideas. And I am really happy with the direction that my painting has taken, and it's been going on for a long time now, like I said, a decade and a half, and I guess with these restrictions have been probably for maybe half of that time. and I'm really happy with how it's working out. And even though it's a limitation, I don't feel like my wings have been clipped or anything. And in fact, it's easier to make a cohesive body of work. And it's easier to get my point across to anybody who is familiar with my art and likes what I'm doing. Now, does this mean I will never paint a landscape or a portrait or an animal? No, but it's probably not going to be in my main body of work that I'm focusing on. So having these limits has actually given me freedom. So that's what I'd like for you to think about, and feel free to comment on this. Have you tried this? Have you put limits on yourself in some way for a project? And how did it work out? And if not, I encourage you, if you haven't actually tried this already, I encourage you to go ahead and try it. And I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised with the results. Well, I hope you found this video to be useful. And again, my name is Manda McKay. Thank you so much for watching.